Welcome to the Court of History. I'm Sidney Blumenthal. I'm here with my colleague, Sean Wilentz of Princeton University. Sean, we are at a somber anniversary of September 11th. And it makes us reflect about where we are and how far we've come in 24 years and what's really happened here. You know, this is the age of retribution under Trump. Just this morning, three former leaders of the FBI, filed a lawsuit in the federal court here in Washington, claiming that there'd been a campaign of retribution against them and against FBI agents in general by Trump and his people he's installed. Apparently, Kash Patel told the agents who were fired that there was no real cause, but they had to satisfy Trump's animus against the agency, which is part of the deep state. And here we are now. The leading domestic intelligence agency basically disabled on the anniversary of 9/11. We have the Department of Homeland Security was created as a result of 9/11. And it is devoted not to protecting the homeland, but to creating a domestic police state, terrorizing American citizens. And we really need to take account and reflect on where we are now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What's your thoughts?
Well, we've gone from the war on terror that President Bush declared in the aftermath to the use of terror and to create a warlike American state. It's not just the fact that he wants to change the name of the Department of Defense to the Department of War. That's not an act of nostalgia. That's an act of aggression. They like war. War is something they want to encourage. We want to be manly. We want to be, lethal. Lethality is the new code word here in the United States. But it's also, using those tactics against Americans. I mean, just as surely as we were attacked on 9/11, our own government is attacking us now. Not just if we happen to live in the cities of Los Angeles or Washington, D.C. or Chicago, but the plans are for something much, much bigger, and the institutions are much bigger. And as you say, Sidney, the institutions that were created in the aftermath of the terrorist attack, the massacre of 9/11, 2001, they've been turned around. They've been now being turned from defending Americans against terrorism to terrorizing Americans. And, it's an extraordinary turnabout over the last 24 years.
Yeah, there's someone I'd like to draw into this conversation who knows a great deal about this, both professionally, in terms of his own background and expertise, and his personal experience right now. And that's Miles Taylor. He is the former chief of staff at the Department of Homeland Security. He had been the head of advanced technology and security strategy at Google. He'd worked on the Homeland Security Committee at the House of Representatives. He's written a #1 New York Times bestselling book on his experiences in the Trump administration and what people said there. He's also been the subject of retribution. Trump issued an executive order naming him. It's an extraordinary event. He's no one has ever done this before, no other president. And he's been singled out, along with others now, a whole list of people who are targets of retribution across, among other areas, not only our national security field, but into every field now. I mean, we have West Point canceling an award to Tom Hanks, an actor who has done more to promote the positive image of the U.S. military than any other figure in the world of entertainment. So, welcome, Miles.
Well, friends, it's great to be with you, especially on this day. And, I will just say at the top end here, it is striking to me, Sid and Sean, how you opened up the program by pointing out the extraordinary irony of what's happened to the department that I used to help run day to day. And I'll confess to reflecting today on the fact that, my own life and career has oddly tracked this whole story arc. I went into government after 9/11 because of the impact that day had on me. And I wanted to be one of those people that committed his whole career to preventing another day like that from happening again. That was it. That was the whole thesis statement for why I wanted to go into public service. And was fortunate enough in the Bush years to be a part of those early efforts to build DHS and then go work at DHS in its early days. And then, of course, later in the Trump administration, to help run that agency, that department, and grow it, third largest department of the federal government. And I will amplify your message from earlier that it's gone from a department created to stop terrorism to really being the focal point of the president's efforts to terrorize the political opposition and his critics and his enemies. And I think a lot of folks like me have had that experience of going into government to protect the country from foreign threats and now realizing 24 years later that the biggest threat is a danger from within.
Well, I got to tell you, Miles, on 9/11, my wife and I were so angry at what had happened, and we could see by walking to the top of a little hill near our house the smoke from still coming out of the Pentagon from the attack on the Pentagon. We put American flags, in the flower pots in front of our house, and today we have DC flags in front of our house in defiance against the effort to terrorize Americans. So tell us where you stand right now in your life as a result of what Trump has done to try and turn you into a pariah for deigning to criticize His Highness.
Well, I mean, look, this goes back to the absurdity of that irony you pointed out at the beginning. Is one of the executive orders Donald Trump issued early in his term for the Department of Homeland Security was not to prepare the department for a new age or enhance its ability to combat terrorism. It was to go investigate a former chief of staff of that department, me, for having criticized him. And I put it in those terms because to think that this is anywhere in the first 1,000 or 10,000 presidential priorities to go direct the resources of the federal government to investigate a critic is not just disturbing, it's very obviously unconstitutional. Someone doesn't need to take Con Law 101 to understand that the powers of the presidency shouldn't be used to criminalize criticism. And yet that's what the president did to us and has now subsequently done to a number of other people. And I will say that it's had an extraordinary effect, and both on our personal lives, but much, much beyond us. Personally, it's resulted, of course, in economic hardship and threats against my family and social alienation from people that are friends and former colleagues who are just scared to be associated with you because you're on the president's blacklist. And that's very, very real. I mean, I'll get more specific about it. I mean, my job was I ran a technology consultancy in Washington, D.C., and my own business partners forced the dissolution of the company as a way to force me out of it because they no longer wanted to be associated with me, not because they're necessarily mega MAGA, but because they were worried that even the association could bring them into the administration's crosshairs. I mean, that social fear is real. and it has very real impacts. The White House knows it. It's why they've been targeting the president's critics in this way. But I say it goes beyond me because those same tactics are being used to intimidate entire sectors of our economy, whole businesses and institutions, and of course, universities, law firms, the heads of different organizations the president doesn't like, entire countries that the president is threatening with all sorts of types of retribution. That intimidation has become one of the most potent tools of the executive branch. And the Department of Homeland Security, I think, is becoming one of the key elements that the president is using to advance that agenda. And, if folks think that agencies like ICE, which is now the largest federal law enforcement agency in America, are going to just be used for immigration and to carry out his retributive immigration agenda, they would be wrong, because agencies like that are allowed to investigate crimes far beyond immigration and will be used, I believe, to stifle the political opposition in the United States.
Yeah, well, we've gone from identifying and investigating crimes to identifying people as targets, which is totally contrary to the entire history of rights and protections in Anglo-American law back to the very beginning. And this is a radical rupture with legal tradition of what's going on. And the entire federal apparatus has been turned into a political targeting mechanism. I mean, think about the Federal Housing Authority. That is now a political targeting mechanism run by a guy named Bill Pulte, who is, the heir to a housing fortune. And he goes around as a henchman, inventing charges against Adam Schiff, the senator from California, Letitia James, the attorney general of New York State, and Lisa Cook, a governor of the Federal Reserve, involving mortgage practices. That's unheard of. It's literally never happened before. So this is the, dare I say it, weaponization of government against the American people right now.
And it starts with particular individuals, but it very, very quickly can metastasize from that. I mean, there are particular people who have, well, in Miles's case, it was very specific, but there are people who have particular offices, like on the Federal Reserve, that are going that are in his way. But it's starting to metastasize, and you're going to see, all sorts of political opponents. And people who are not particularly high profile necessarily come under this, this retributive regime. And the way in which he's, as you say, Sidney, the way in which he's weaponizing institutions that have access, in part thanks to Mr. Musk, but have access to all of our information, know exactly who we are, know everything about us, know exactly where we're most vulnerable. It becomes then a true police state on the order of things that we are, associate with the old Soviet bloc and so forth. I mean, that's what is coming down the line as far as I can see.
I mean, just to give you guys one tiny anecdote of how expansive this retribution agenda has become, I'm just going to walk you through my day yesterday, and just a piece of my day. I was on a drive into Washington, D.C., and I got a phone call from someone who's a former senior federal law enforcement leader who has been targeted by the president for revenge, has been publicly humiliated and pursued, and it's been very destructive to that individual's career and ability to support their family. I went to lunch with someone who was one of the 37 individuals whose security clearances were recently revoked by the Trump administration. This person is not a partisan. This person, I think, has voted Republican in most elections, but had her security clearance revoked because she worked on issues that the president doesn't like, namely issues that have a relation to Russia and holding Vladimir Putin accountable. And all of a sudden, she finds herself out of work and without a security clearance. and with a family to support because of that arbitrary revenge agenda. I then was at a happy hour and saw my friend Olivia Troy, who had been Homeland Security advisor to Mike Pence, who is still being sued by Trump officials who are trying to shut her up. And one of the folks that has gone after her is Kash Patel, the current FBI director. And she's still grappling with all the fallout from that, which has been enormously difficult. And then as I'm leaving that event, who did I run into on Capitol Hill sitting outside at a restaurant was, Sid, you mentioned him a moment ago, Senator Adam Schiff.
Yes.
He's sitting there at a table, and he hollered at me on the sidewalk, and I went up and I said a quick hello. And, we briefly compared notes on how dark this moment is. And the only optimistic thing I could think to say to him was, well, Senator, when I saw that you were being targeted as well, I at least felt a small measure of relief, because that meant the boat was getting bigger and it wouldn't just be me on the thing if the boat sunk. And, he sort of laughed and agreed with that. And that's the only cause for optimism I think a number of us have right now who have been targeted by this White House is the bigger and bigger that boat gets, the more potential opposition there is against this administration. And again, that boat is not just a handful of elites inside the DC Beltway. It's becoming ordinary Americans all across this country who are finding themselves caught in the web of Trump's revenge.
But that's political revenge. It's not just personal revenge. It's not just people who have personally done something to him, which, is at the beginning you could even see, in your case, Miles, you could see sort of that he might have taken it personally. But this goes beyond that now. Now we're talking about doing basically Vladimir's business for him. Now we're talking about doing all kinds of things that have nothing to do with personal revenge and have everything to do with a political a program. And it's a political program that may not be particularly ideologically worked out. It may be something that seems very ad hoc, as the president can be. Nevertheless, it is personal. It is political persecution rather than just personal persecution. It's political revenge as opposed to just personal revenge. And we have to bear that in mind.
That's absolutely right. And, nowhere is that more obvious than somewhere like Washington, D.C. or Los Angeles or Chicago, cities that have been targeted for installation of U.S. troops as part of the president's effort to create leverage in democratic cities and to punish democratic cities. And, this is one of those things that I would like to say is a conspiracy theory. But I didn't say it, and Sean didn't say it, and Sid didn't say it. The president said it. He said he's targeting these places because they are Democrat cities. And, 2 nights ago, I was over by the White House filming something that's part of an effort that we're going to announce here in a few weeks to try to hold Donald Trump accountable. And I saw that his motorcade was just around the corner. And so I walked down to see what was going on. And Donald Trump was at a dinner with Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth as part of a sort of valedictory night out to celebrate how safe he has allegedly made the nation's capital by putting these troops in Washington. And I've got to tell you, it felt very much like an emperor has no clothes situation, because Donald Trump didn't stroll out spontaneously to a restaurant like he tried to make it seem. He traveled a half block, chauffeured by an armored motorcade, to a restaurant that's already within the security perimeter of the White House, ate there, and took the half block chauffeured armored limousine ride back to his house at the White House. Not only was it not brave, it didn't prove anything about him somehow making Washington, D.C. more secure. Of course, he was at a restaurant that was in an area that looked fully secure and, orderly because it's right next to the White House. But he's done these things in D.C. for the purposes of a photo op, so he can have the powers of a strong man, even though this was a city that didn't want troops and that didn't need troops because crime was already on the decline. And that sort of arbitrariness that an emperor, enforces leads to people so afraid of him that they, will believe in the invisibility cloak, as the fable goes, rather than believing that the emperor is naked. And that just was so striking to me to see the absurdity of that photo op the other night. And it sort of captured the symbolism, I think, of the moment with this man, and also the fear of this man.
Yeah, you were a witness to an interesting event where Trump went out, possibly for one of the first times, into this city, Washington, D.C., where I live, to Joe's Crab House on 15th and K Street, very close to the White House. And it's a high-end place. It's filled with lobbyists. It's on K Street. And nonetheless, he came in and the place erupted with boos and jeers, just like it did when he was at the U.S. Open. These are well-heeled people. I believe some people yelled Hitler at him. Part of his problem is that what he's doing is unpopular, and his response to that is not to reflect and reform, but instead to ratchet up. And maybe you can tell us, given your experience in DHS and knowing about how ICE operates, how they're using this now as a police force.
Well, it very much is, and I'll say, of course, the FBI is as well. As you all mentioned at the top end of the program, the lawsuit yesterday filed by a number of FBI officials who've been on the receiving end of the president's retribution. And I spoke to a former senior FBI official the other day who said, this is a very reasonable person who's not a partisan. I don't know how he votes, but he said in really stark language that his old bureau that he worked at had become the pocket police for the president, the pocket police for the president. And to hear that from a career law enforcement official who's not used to talking in Washington pundit sound bites is alarming, to say the least.
Is that becoming a phrase among people?
I think so. That's actually the first time I'd heard the
police. First time I've heard
police. Same.
Yeah.
It's like a pocket veto.
I've heard of pocket vetoes, but not pocket police.
That's right. I'm taking it from him. I'm taking it from him, and I'm not going to cite him by name, and I'm just going to steal it as my own. Right. But ICE is that now too. And to your question, Sid, there is a lot that agency can do. And I will tell you, when I was at DHS, we had ICE investigate everything from cyber crimes and cryptocurrency to harassment of underage people on the internet, to nuclear weapons proliferation, to terrorism. I mean, you name it. There is a vast array of crimes and the legal authorities to investigate those crimes that ICE has. It is not just about people illegally coming into the United States. But now under the authority of someone who wants to abuse that power, it can become a very, very dangerous tool to surveil the opposition, to harass the opposition. I'll just give you a tiny example of what CBP and ICE, for instance, could do at the United States border, which is they could stop and harass and search the effects of the president's political opponents and evade some of the requirements of the Fourth Amendment. And the courts have ruled that ICE and CBP have this greater presumption of investigative authority right there at the border as people come in. And as a hypothetical, you could imagine, let's pick Adam Schiff. Let's say Adam Schiff's coming back into the country. They need no reasonable suspicion to be able to search him. They could send him into secondary screening for an invented reason and take his laptop and take his cell phone and go send those things off for forensic analysis as part of an effort, just like the Housing Authority is doing, to go on a fishing expedition, to hunt for crimes, to hunt for infractions, to hunt for embarrassing information on that person's phone. There's really nothing stopping this administration from doing it. And I will tell you, folks like me and a lot of former government officials have been taking vastly increased precautions when going across borders, because we do believe that this administration will start to engage in political harassment using those agencies and tools. And there are some indicators that that's already begun. People who are lawyers for individuals who've been under investigation by the Trump administration have been stopped and harassed and had their devices searched. But I think we're just seeing the beginning of that. But it can go much beyond that. I mean, there was reporting this past week about how ICE has now resuscitated this zombie contract that allows them to surreptitiously monitor phones using very sophisticated malware that doesn't require the target to click a link or do something. It allows the agency to very, very secretively and quietly infiltrate someone's cell phone. There's real efforts to start to ramp up that agency's ability to monitor Americans. And if that sounds worrisome to people, let me point you to the fact that when I was in the Trump administration, I personally was told about the president wanting to wiretap his own staff at the White House, who are, despite working for him,
wait a minute, Miles. Let's pause and stop for here and talk about that. That's the first time I have heard about that. And you heard about that when you were chief of staff at the Department of Homeland Security?
That's correct.
And you heard that from people who were then working in the Trump White House?
A very, very senior official at the Trump White House had called and told me one evening that the president had demanded that the staff of the White House be wiretapped so he could catch leakers, not people who were leaking national security secrets. To Donald Trump, leakers meant anyone who's saying a bad thing about me in the media. And the president had to be reminded that the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution doesn't give him the authority and, in fact, prohibits him from unilaterally ordering wiretaps on private citizens. It doesn't matter that these people worked for Donald Trump. He can't just wiretap them. Now, this individual managed to just sort of put the suggestion away from Trump, right? Make sure he doesn't mention it again.
This is someone who had sufficient responsibility in the White House, who was one of the now well-known adults in the room.
The adults in the room.
Who was able to, make sure that just like Gary Cohn, who was the White House economic advisor at the time, made sure certain options were not presented to Trump because he knew Trump would pick the most damaging. Those people are now gone.
And this is someone, Sid, who was in the chain of command who could have effectuated that order. And of course did not, because it would have been illegal to do so, and talked the president out of it. What we don't know today is, has Donald Trump made such a directive to his lieutenants who have now shown themselves to be more compliant? And if he has, would we even know about it if he had? And it doesn't take too many logic leaps to get to what I just said about ICE, which is you've got an agency that's now developing the capacities to be able to do very, very easy monitoring of people's phones. And not that many people would have to know about it if the president wanted to direct that warrantless sort of wiretapping. Something that would have seemed outlandish not long ago is now very plausible, very scary, and very unlikely to see public scrutiny if the administration wanted to avoid it.
So, Miles, let's take a break here at part one of our conversation and launch part two. We want to thank you for part one, but we're going to continue on part two.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.